Okay, so this tutorial is about the structure of the Ionian major scale. So the Ionian scale, um, written Ionian, okay, as you know, a scale is a succession of notes, da, 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 one note after the other. That's what you call a scale. So usually you hear people talk about the major scale, but actually there are different types of major scale. You have scales such as the Ionian scale, you have Lydian, Mixolydian. So there are different types of major scales, but the scale that most people are familiar with is the Ionian scale, which people know as Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. And if you descend, Do, Ti, La, Sol, Fa, Mi, Re, Do. Okay, so when we talk about the structure of the Ionian scale, immediately you think Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. Now, what is the structure of that scale? Okay, first of all, you could think of the scale as Do being the first degree of the Ionian scale. Re is the second. Mi is the third. Fa is the fourth. Sol is the fifth. La is the sixth. Chi is the seventh. And then at the end of the scale, you repeat the first one. Do, which could be either called the eighth or first, because after all it's the same note. Only 8 notes later at a higher pitch. So you have on the piano, Do, let's say go. Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. Do, Do. Same sound except that the pitch is higher as you go up the scale to the right. Okay. So the structure of the Ionian scale, the Ionian scale being recognized as Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do, right? And thought of as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is the same as 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But 8 and 1 are the same. Okay. So now, in order to think of the structure of the Ionian scale, you'll see between Do and Re, there's a whole step, right? So the structure, a way to memorize the structure formula, if you will, of the Ionian scale, you would say whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay? Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. What does that mean? That means that between the first and the second degree of the scale is a whole step. Between the second and the third is a whole step. Between the third and the fourth degree of the scale is a half step. Between the fourth and fifth degree, between the fifth and the sixth, before the sixth and the seventh, these are all whole step intervals. However, between the sixth and the eighth, or back to 1, if you will, it's a half step. Okay? Now, what is meant by whole and half step? Alright, we'll get to that. So if you notice, between Do, Re, Mi, here on top you'll see the Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, back to 1 or 8, right? you'll see between those each degree, right? Uh, you'll see that between the third and the fourth, and between the seventh and the eighth, eighth being one, that's where your half step occur. Okay, so here the distance between the third and fourth notes and the seventh and eighth notes are half steps. Those are the two naturally occurring half steps in the Ionian major scale, which we refer to in solfege as do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Okay? Alright, so what is a half step? A half step is the distance between two notes, whereby they are next to each other with no notes in between. For example, if you look at the piano, right? You have C, D, E, F. You'll notice that between E and F, right? C, D, E, F. Between E and F, there are no notes in between. And so you would say there's a naturally occurring half step interval. And if you go between B and C, you'll also see that there are no notes in between those two notes. And on the piano, it's very graphically laid out so that you could actually see that between those two spots, 3 and 4 and 7 and 8, E and F, B and C, there are no notes in between, right? And so these are your half step, right? And so but a half step doesn't necessarily have to be, it doesn't just happen between E and F and B and C. These are just naturally occurring as you look at the keyboard. However, if you go from C to the, if you want to go to a half step, you have to go from C to C sharp. And that's your half step. If you go from C to D, that means you skipped the sharp to get to D. Therefore, it's not a half step anymore because you have to go 1 plus 2 half step or 1 whole step in order to go from C to D. Okay? So, an example, okay, the chromatic scale is an example, for instance, of half step intervals played as a scale. So for instance, if I want to go from C to C in half step intervals, I go C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C. So what I did here, I moved in half steps, and that's called the chromatic scale. The chromatic scale moves in half steps. Okay? C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C. Okay? So that is an example of the chromatic scale as being an example of a half step scale. But the Ionian scale has a combination of whole steps, and half steps. So in other words, you only find your half step between the third and the fourth, between the 7th and the 8th degree. But for all the other ones, you find whole steps. So from 1 to 2, it's a whole step. From 2 to 3, it's a whole step. 3 to 4, a half step. But from 4 to 5, it's a whole step because you have to skip. From 5 to 6, you have to skip. From 6 to 7, you have to skip. And from 7 to 8 or back to 1, you don't skip, it's a half step. Okay? So you have do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So between your mi, fa, 3, 4, ti, do, 7 and 8, That's where your half step take place. Everything else is a whole step. Okay? So sharp notes are located to the right of natural notes such as A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So as you're looking at this notation here on this PowerPoint, you see C with this symbol that's actually read as sharp. Okay, so the hashtag in music is called sharp. C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, and this is of course the chromatic scale which moves in half steps. So C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C. And so here notation says that it's read as C, C sharp, D, D sharp, etc. Okay? So sharp notes are located to the right of natural notes such as A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Right? Okay. And of course, the whole step is the distance or interval between two notes whereby there is one note in between them. For example, C and D have a C sharp in between them. D and E have a D sharp in between them. Okay, so the whole step interval is equal to 2 half steps. So in other words, from C to D is a whole step because there's a note in between them. Okay? From D to E is also a whole step because there's a note in between them. By the same token, you could say from C sharp to D sharp is a whole step because there's a note in between them. Right? You could say from D sharp to F is a whole step because there's a note in between them. You could say from E to F sharp is a whole step interval because there's a note in between them. Okay? So half steps you do not skip, but for whole step you have to skip a note. You have to skip. Okay? Okay? Alright. So this is our tutorial on the structure of the Ionian major scale.